You had the page online because then I just saw a song
For the Gates of Kilo, right?
And then Tag America kept up the fuss. Internet.
So they took it off?
So they wrote on it, it said page removed by request of Tag America. Yeah? No, it wasn't moved, it just said not. You had the page online because then I just saw a song.
Right, okay, let's get going. Right.
Who's online?
Nobody at the moment. Right. But some people say they watch afterwards. Okay, very briefly. Halacha is called Pesach has to be what? Roasted by fire. So if a part of it get heated not by fire, it's considered a posel korban. What is into a posel korban? What do you do with a posel korban? Burn it. Very good. Now what happens if that bit then falls back onto the korban Pesach? You've got a roasted korban Pesach, a bit of the gravy that is splashes onto the oven. The oven.
Did you have to burn the whole korban or just the bits that don't get?
No, you burn. Oh, wait a second. You've got kosher korban Pesach. It's burning nicely on the fire. Roasting nicely on the fire. Not burning, not so good. Yeah, right. Roasting nicely on the fire. A bit falls and lands, let's say, on another hot piece of surface. That hot piece of surface is not fire. So the bit that falls on there is not sli alidei eish. It's not roasted through fire.
How much sli does it need to be before you can do something else with it?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a very good question. I can't go into it. Taste discusses that.
But you can do something else with it afterwards.
Taste says you can, because if you roasted it, it's roasted afterwards. You have to do whatever you want with it. You can even cook it. Taste says, but nobody agrees with him, and it's really haven't got time for that. Again, it was roasted, beautifully roasting. A bit of it went onto a hot surface. The bit that goes onto a hot surface, is that considered roasted? No. That's considered roasted not through fat. So that bit, what would you do with it?
Burn it.
Good, burn it in base of sreifa because it's posel korban. But then that bit goes and falls back onto the korban Pesach. Now what do? Now you have to cut away from the korban Pesach the amount that it got blias of the issa of the korban Pesach. And how much is that? That is the whole topic of today. Says the Mishnah, if a bit of it went onto the earthenware into the oven, you should peel away. That means the amount that touched the oven, that's right. The bit that touched the oven, no, peel from the korban Pesach. It means as you got korban Pesach and the bottom of it touched the walls, peel the korban Pesach away. Not if some of the gravy fell onto the earthenware, and then it fell back onto the oven, onto the korban Pesach, sorry. Then you have to do more than just kedei klippa. Kedei klippa is the peel, kedei netila is the width of a finger. So kedei klippa is the amount, and Mr. B'chava is very marich about this, is not the amount, when you peel a potato, you can scrape it where pieces just fall off, or you can peel where one peel comes off one big peel. Kedei klippa is enough that if you were to peel it, it would stay as one peel. That's kedei klippa.
Like a tangerine.
Like a tangerine, very good. Kedei netila is the thickness of a finger around. So again, if a bit touches the oven, you take a proper chunk of meat. You must remember it's from everywhere that touched, so you're taking quite a bit. So again, if it touched the oven, you do kedei klippa. If a bit of gravy fell on the oven, and then from that it fell back onto the korban Pesach, you do kedei netila, which is a finger's width. Not if some of it fell onto flour, because flour, if gravy falls on flour, can you pull out the gravy? It's impossible. It gets absorbed in the flour. So you take a kemitza of the flour from around where that gravy fell, and then you put it and you burn it. If you soak, that means you smear the korban Pesach with oil. In the old days, if you wanted to roast something shmak, nowadays, even when you make a steak, what do? You put some oil on the fire, and then you put the steak on it. So here, what you do is you smeared the korban Pesach with oil of truma. If everybody amongst the designated people or kohanim, they can eat it without any problem. If it's yidam, can't eat truma. So if you haven't yet roasted it, you just smeared it. Just rinse it off. Because if you take cold piece of meat, put oil on, and oil of truma, so if you rinse it off, it's good enough. But if you already roasted it after you soaked it, so it's ready in the meat, you have to peel it away. You can't charge people. Normally, if I go to Pesach and I say, "Do you want to come to my conference?" I'm charging you for a piece of meat. You're going to eat some of my Pesach. Let's say conference costs £50. There's 5 of us, £10 each. But if I've added Shemin Ma'aser Sheni, not allowed to sell in Yerushalayim. So since it's got oil of Ma'aser Sheni, I can't charge you for it. She'ain Podim Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim, you're not allowed to redeem. You're not allowed to
for anything.
There's a shaila whether you can charge for Pesach. I certainly can't charge for the oil. The question is, can you charge for the
oil?
Pesach?
Just the you wouldn't charge for the oil.
Yes, you would. Oil is an expensive product in those days. Those days, this was oil for everything. Itma. This is the main. Cham. If you go hot into hot, for example, a hot piece of chaza onto a kosher piece of meat, or a hot piece of meat into hot milk. Let's say you go home by mistake making stuff a coffee, and your wife drops by mistake a piece of the meat of the cholent into it. Hakol, everybody agrees also you can't drink not your coffee and not the piece of meat that fell into it. Or a piece of chaza falls into your cholent, into hot, if there's no shishim, it's lost. Sin and a piece of cold cheese fell onto a piece of cold cuts. Let's say you've got cold cuts, right? Salami. Piece of cheese falls on it. Mutter, everybody agrees that's fine because it's cold onto cold. Just rinse it off. If something hot falls into cold or cold falls into hot, that means everybody agrees that one of them, in one of those cases, it is also, in one of the cases, it is mutter. Hot into cold, cold into hot is a machlokes. In one case, everybody agrees. That means like this. Rav says the upper one has much more power of heat. So therefore, if a hot piece of meat, let's say, falls into a cold cup of milk, the hot piece of meat is belay into the milk because heat is higher. And therefore, what happens is, what's the logic of Olah Gova? Anybody know? Because heat rises. So heat, the hotter one is higher. So therefore, the heat fell in. So therefore, the heat makes the cold also. So if you've got cold cup of milk, let's say for breakfast, cold cup of milk, and a hot piece of meat of the chont falls in according to Rav, what's the din? Everything's also. You got to check out your milk, got to check out your meat. According to Shmuel, the Tator Gova, the lower one is more strong. The reason is, according to Shmuel, because that which is in its place has more effect than that which fell into it. The milk was always in its place. So if you got cold milk and a hot piece of meat, you take the hot piece of meat out and you can drink the milk. But if it's the other way around, let's say you've got a hot coffee which is milky, and a cold piece of salami falls in. According to Rav, you take the salami out, rinse it, and you take the coffee and you can drink it.
According if it's got meat taste in it.
Well, even if it's got, because it won't. According to Rav, it won't have.
Oh, right.
Because Rav will say, since it's cold salami, I think Shmuel will say, no, the Tator Gova, the bottom one is more important, and therefore it is also. Rashi points out that Rav and Shmuel, even though we always pass Rav and Shmuel, we always pass like Rav, here we pass like Shmuel. There's a safer.
What does Shmuel hold?
Tator Gova, the lower one is more important. I tell you, once when my children took a hot piece of pot of chicken soup and put it down on a cold bar of chocolate. So the chocolate all melted into the pot. So I had a nice layer of cold chocolate once I noticed it.
Different because it's not sitting on it. There's something between.
No, the pot is considered meaty. The pot was boiling. You took it off the fire onto a bar of chocolate. So we passed in Tator Gova. So therefore, really, the chocolate should be permitted. The problem is that we are
There's no problem with the soup, though.
No problem with the soup. The problem is we passed in Tator Gova, and therefore the problem is you have to take a clipper. The chocolate, by the time you take a clipper, there was no chocolate left. So I said, okay. So now we're going to try big rice for our mission. Not a word for a bit of gravy falls onto earthenware. The chazayla falls onto it. The one that haven't understood that it fell onto a cold piece of the oven. So what's the issa cold piece of oven? Why should it be awesome? The answer is that the gravy was hot. The gravy fell onto the cold surface of the oven. And if you hold the loy gova, so the hot gravy fell onto a cold oven. According to Rabbi, loy gova, the top one's stronger. So therefore the oven now becomes hot because of the gravy that fell on it. And that's how it does bishul. Why? The hot gravy makes the oven hot. And then the hot oven makes the gravy hot. If the gravy falls onto the cold oven, but the gravy is hot, Eloi Gova dictates that now the oven is considered hot because the gravy is higher than the oven. It fell onto the oven. Then the oven now becomes hot, and therefore now the gravy becomes cooked through what? Through the heat of the oven. And the Torah says you have to get heated, cooked from fire, not cooked from the oven. And then the gravy falls back onto the Korban Pesach. So now you've got on the Korban Pesach something no good. If the oven is cold, if he makes the gravy cold, that means if the hot gravy falls onto a cold surface, according to Shmuel, what's the din? The cold surface does nothing because Tator Gova. We're not talking about a cold oven. We're talking about a piping hot oven. And therefore, when the gravy fell on it, it got cooked, not because the gravy heated up the oven and then backwards heated itself up, but rather it cooked it because of what? because the oven itself was hot. Now, not a vote while if it fell onto flour, you should take away its place. Because we talk about cold flour. The same logic, that the hot gravy fell onto the cold flour. And what's the din according to Rav? That the top one is stronger. So it makes the flour, which was cold, hot. Once the flour becomes hot, it now heats up the gravy, which is on top. The maltach makes the flour hot.
Why would it heat? Surely it'll be on a lower heat than the thing that fell on it, and therefore why would it cook something that's
I know,
hotter than
that's
it?
I was waiting for somebody to ask it. Oh, it's very, very strange logic. You've got a hot piece of gravy. It falls onto flour, which is cold. Because we say, lo yigova, that what? That makes the flour hot, because the top one makes it strong. And then now that the flour is hot, we say that what? It heats up the gravy, and the gravy is not tzli anymore, it's tzli flour, whatever you want to call it. So what you should say, which is very strange. This is how Chazal understood it. It's Keli Sheni or Keli Shlishi. But the answer is, so what? If you're the lo yigova, so then the heat now has become stronger over the flour.
What about heat rises?
Right, so what?
Heat rises,
No, but because of the heat rises, therefore the heat of the top one is stronger, and therefore it has more power than the lower coldness, and therefore it heats up the flour. So therefore the flour is now making the gravy hot. Since it's called here's a big machlokes Rashi Tosfos. According to Shiur, if you've got hot gravy that falls onto cold flour, what's the din? Rashi holds that everything is mutter. Because Rashi, let's say you've got hot chaza, let's say your neighbor's cooking hot chaza, right? You've got a barbecue and it splashes. According to Rashi, because we say tator gova, I think. Tosfos says no, you still need to do netilas mekomo. And the nafkimina, if you look over here in most Gemars, they put tiskele b'yitelis mekomo in round brackets. Do you have it in round brackets?
Yeah.
So that's because Rashi doesn't hold it. Rashi holds it's fine. Tosfos, that the second to bottom Tosfos goes through it, that we are givers it, and you would have to do netilas mekomo, and this is a big shaila in over there. We haven't got time. We're talking about hot flour, and that's why he cooks it. So now, if you smear it with oil of tumah, if it's yid they can't eat too much, what should you do? What? Oh, that's a very, very good question. Because the halacha is tzli eish, not with other things. And we said yes before you were allowed to make it burn. Want to say spicing only afterwards. That's the last thing, but we'll see. Actually, the Gemara does talk about it. We'll leave it. Oh, the Gemara discusses it. The Gemara discusses it. Depends on which stage you're going to add the salt and pepper. If it's a yidam, so what should you do like this? Let's say you take the Korban Pesach, you smear it with oil of tumah. You have to then rinse it off because otherwise the yidam are allowed to eat it. If you've already gone and roasted it after you smeared it with tumah, you have to peel it. And it's like this: when you smear it, the top is cold, the bottom is hot. So therefore, you could say do clipper. That's enough.
What happens if you smear it before you put it on?
Okay, that's another question. It's a good question. Here we talk about you've got proper hot Korban Pesach smeared with oil. So now, according to Rabbi, lo yigova, so therefore it doesn't matter. But according to Shmuel, the whole thing should be also because he says tator gova, you got the hot Korban Pesach and oil of tumah. Because since when you smear it, you're only using a tiny amount. Even Shmuel holds that it doesn't make it also. When is it also? When you put a considerable amount, but a tiny smear doesn't forbid the whole thing. But you do need to do kedei klipa, which means you have to peel it away. But only if you put a proper amount, according to Shmuel, it would be also. Now the Gemara brings two brises which say exactly like Shmuel, but both of them need a tiny bit of editing because otherwise they don't make sense. But we say tiny kavos Shmuel cham also. The cham also cold into hot is also. Who holds of that? Cold into hot is also. Who holds of that? Cold into hot is Shmuel because he says tator gova. Give the chamur the mekele yafshele balapota. Klipa me in the boyish that easy to peel it. So the Beis says 4 stages: hot into hot, also cold into cold, mutter. Cold into hot, also like shmur because Tatar Gova. Hot into cold, what do? You peel it. And now another Beis is exactly the same thing. Hot meat into cold, in hot meat into hot milk. Cham netech sin cham mediach, cham netech sin mediach. The cham who had to make it, if she did a bola pot, clip me boy, the boy should is painting, and then cham netech sin and kilev sin netech sin mediach. So again, hot into hot, also hot into cold is hot into cold. Machlokas we paskin peered it. Very good. Machlokas and Shmuel. Cold into hot is we paskin it is also completely. So if you go home and dip your salami into hot coffee, well, actually, coffee is kilisheni, into your hot porridge cooking on the stove, then your entire thing is awesome. It only needs rinsing is good enough if it's not salted. But molchoy also, when something's very, very salty, then it has the ability to transfer taste. Something which is salted is like it's hot. Kovush, something which is pickled. So if you pickle, for example, a cheese in a milky pot, it will all be awesome because it's like proper cooking. Masha'in kain salty, which is not as strong as pickling. What did I say?
You said milky pot.
Did I say milk in the? I meant a meaty pot. Sorry. If you pickle cheese in a meaty pot, then the whole thing is awesome. Everything is awesome. If you just put salted meat and salted milk together, it's not completely awesome because it's only like ruseach. So then it depends which one's high, which one's lower. Perhaps only need to clipper. So there's two different stages. You've got cold onto cold, which is mutter. Salted, which is like it's heat. Pickled, which is even worse than heat. It's like it's properly cooked. When we say that salted is no good, it has to be properly salted. If it's normal salt, that's not considered salted properly. So Rashi elsewhere, not Rashi here, says that why would a person who salts something for a long journey, that's considered salted. But if a person adds a bit of salt because he wants to eat it now, that's not considered salted. So we say, we think about something salty, we mean something properly salty. This halacha, this Gemara over here, 4 or 5 lines, it's got like pages and pages of it. We're talking about a young pigeon, a chicken, right? He fell into a bowl of kutach. What's kutach have inside it?
Moldy milk.
Old milk, moldy bread, and salt. So it fell into a jug of milk. So you've got a cold piece of chicken. It fell into a milky jug. That's the basic story. So this mutter, who is as wise to be able to say this is mutter? You have to be wise to say something's mutter. Say it's us, it's that easy. The problem is, we just said a second ago that kutach has what inside it has milk and salt. And we just said that salt is what's the din, it's got the same as heat. And if the chicken fell into the milk, we pass in like shmur that word, that tator goba. So the milk which is hot because it's got salt.
Salt in there.
That's the answer. Again, the milk has got is inside it. It's got salt inside it. Salt makes it like it's hot. So if the cold chicken falls into it, it should be cold into hot, which we pass in like shmur, cold into hot is what? Osa, because we say tator goba. Says the Gemara over here, it wasn't so salty. It was only a little bit salty, and therefore it didn't have the din of hot. So it had the din of cold into cold. And cold into cold, you just rinse it off. And now the Gemara says 3 limitations to this kula. It doesn't matter. It was not hot. But had to be roasted, and then it fell into the milk. Then you'd have to peel away the chicken. But nonetheless, pili, that the chicken got no cracks. If it's got grooves and cracks inside it, the milk gets, it's porous. That's a good word. If it's full of spices, also because the spices have the ability. So if you've got a cold piece of chicken, falls into milk, it says okay, even if milk is salted. If the milk is, what?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. If it's very salted milk, if it's very salty milk, it's no good because we pass like shmor melech, and therefore it's tator gova. If it's normal milk, it's okay with 3 conditions. It's got no cracks, it's got no spices, and it's not roasted. Omarav. The question is, should we carry on or should we stop? You need to go. It's a whole new topic.
What's the next step like?
I think we'll have to stop and we'll have to tell people that not to shall be a tiny bit longer And then the worst is if we don't finish Motzei Shabbos the daf, what we'll do is on Sunday, we'll catch up eventually. It's a shame to lose this daf. We won't